was 1979. Damascus, Syria, was a city of contradictions. Ancient history colliding with Cold War modernity. The scent of jasmine mixing with the exhaust of Soviet-made limousines. It was a city of whispers, where the walls had ears, and the Mukhabarat, the Syrian intelligence service, was an ever-present specter. In this paranoid capital, where trust was the most expensive currency, one man moved with a freedom that no diplomat or general possessed. His name was Amin Safir. To the elite of Syrian society, he was a fixture of culture, a man of singular talent and tragic circumstance. Blind since his early 20s due to a genetic condition, Amin had channeled his loss of sight into a terrifyingly acute sense of hearing and a mastery of the piano that brought grown men to tears. He was the preferred piano tuner for the government ministries and the star performer at the private salons of the Ba'ath Party leadership. Amin lived in a world of soundscapes. He navigated the winding streets of the old city not by landmarks, but by the echo of footsteps against stone, the specific hum of electrical transformers, and the distant rhythm of traffic. To the casual observer, he was a harmless artist, a man dependent on the kindness of strangers, existing in a perpetual state of vulnerability. This perception was his armor. In a society obsessed with surveillance, the blind man was the only one nobody watched. Who would suspect the man who needed a hand to cross the street? Who would lower their voice around the musician who lived in the dark? But Amin Safir was not just a musician. He was a man harboring a profound secret, a resentment against the regime that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with personal history. His family, once prominent merchants, had been systematically dismantled by the shifting tides of coups and counter-coups that plagued Syria in the mid-20th century. He had watched, before he went dark, as his father was taken away, never to return. He was alone, isolated by his disability and his grief, and in the world of intelligence, isolation is an opportunity. It was late autumn when the contact was made. It didn't happen in a dark alley or a safe house, but in the most public place imaginable, the lobby of the Semiramis Hotel, where Amin played jazz standards 3 nights a week. A man approached the piano during a break. He smelled of expensive French tobacco and old paper. "Your rendition of Autumn Leaves lacks the usual melancholy," the man said, his Arabic accented with a trace of something European, perhaps French, perhaps Swiss. "It sounds anticipatory, like you are waiting for something to fall." Amin smiled, his fingers ghosting over the keys. "Leaves fall, sir. It is their nature. I only play the gravity. I am a collector of rare talents," the stranger continued. "I have a piano in Paris that hasn't sung in years, but I am currently in Damascus looking for someone who can tune out the noise and find the true frequency. My name is Omri." The conversation was code, though Amin didn't know it yet. Omri was not a collector, and he wasn't French. He was a recruiter for the Mossad, Israel's Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations. He had been watching Amin for months, noting not just his access to the homes of high-ranking officials, but the peculiar way Amin tilted his head when generals spoke near him. The look of a man recording, not just listening. The recruitment pitch, when it finally came days later in a quiet tea house, was unlike any other. There were no offers of vast riches or ideology. Henri simply offered Amin a way to strike back at the chaos that had taken his sight and his family. He offered him purpose. "You live in the dark," Henri said softly. "We want to give you a way to see everything. We want you to be our eyes in a city where everyone else is blind to the truth. Recruiting an asset is an art form. Training a blind asset is a journey into the unknown. Standard tradecraft relies heavily on visuals, dead drops, hand signals, surveillance detection routes involving window reflections. None of this applied to Amin. The Mossad had to reinvent the manual. For 3 months, Amin vanished from Damascus. The cover story was plausible: a medical sabbatical in Europe, a faint hope of an experimental treatment in Switzerland. In reality, he was moved to a safe house in the countryside of France, isolated from the world, with a team of specialists from Caesarea, the Mossad's Special Operations Division. The training was grueling, not physically, but mentally. They had to weaponize his remaining senses. The first phase was memory. A spy must remember names, dates, specifications, and conversations verbatim. Eamon already possessed a musician's memory, capable of holding entire concertos in his mind. The instructors pushed this further. They played him recordings of crowded rooms, layers of overlapping conversations, clinking glasses, background music. "Filter it," the instructor would command. "Track the conversation in the back left corner. What are they discussing?" At first, it was just noise. But slowly, Eamon learned to isolate frequencies. He learned to distinguish the timbre of a nervous voice from a confident one. He learned to identify a man by the cadence of his walk, the weight of his step, the fabric of his clothes rustling as he moved. Then came the technical tradecraft. How does a blind man transmit intelligence? He couldn't write reports or photograph documents. The solution was elegant in its simplicity and complexity: music. The Mossad technicians developed a code based on musical notation. Specific chord progressions, intervals, and rhythms corresponded to military terminology, numbers, and urgency levels. A major seventh chord followed by a diminished fifth might signify Soviet advisor. A rapid arpeggio in a specific key might mean imminent shipment. Eamon spent weeks memorizing this lexicon. He wasn't just learning a code, he was learning a new language where the piano was his typewriter. He would record practice sessions or new compositions on cassette tapes, which would then be passed to his handlers. To any Syrian censor listening, it was avant-garde jazz or classical practice. To the analysts in Tel Aviv, it was a detailed report on the inner workings of the Syrian High Command. But the most dangerous part of the training was psychological. "You are invisible," Henry told him repeatedly. "People do not see you. They see a prop, a piece of furniture. They will speak in front of you because they believe you do not understand the context of their world or that you are too focused on your keys to care. You must never break this illusion. If you hear something shocking, your rhythm cannot falter. If a gun is placed on the table, you cannot flinch." They tested him with sudden loud noises, with sudden changes in atmospheric pressure, even with physical jostling while he played. He had to remain the stoic blind musician, lost in his art, oblivious to the wolves in the room. By the end of the winter, Eamon Safir returned to Damascus. He looked the same, perhaps a bit paler, walking with his cane and his dark glasses. But the man behind the lenses had changed. He was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was an active operator in a secret war, carrying a weapon no metal detector could find: his mind. Upon his return, Eamon's reputation as a virtuoso tuner had only grown. Absence, as intended, had made the heart grow fonder, and the pianos of Damascus had fallen out of tune. His first major assignment came from the Ministry of Defense. General Brigadier Suhail al-Hassan was a man of immense power and minimal patience. He had acquired a grand piano for his wife, a Steinway imported at great expense, which sat in the main salon of his villa in the Medze district. This district was a fortress, home to embassies, intelligence headquarters, and the residences of the regime's inner circle. Getting a Mossad agent inside the Medze district usually required months of planning and complex cover identities. Eamon simply took a taxi to the gate, showed his musician's union card, and was escorted inside by a bored guard who checked his tool bag but didn't bother to pat him down. Why would he? He was the blind tuner. The general's villa was a hive of activity. As Eamon set to work on the Steinway, stripping the cover and laying out his tuning hammer and mutes, he began to scan the room. He sensed the dimensions by the echo of his own cough. He smelled heavy cigar smoke and the metallic tang of gun oil. Security detail was close. He began the tuning process, striking keys with repetitive, monotonous force. Ping, ping, ping. He adjusted the tension pins. To a non-musician, it was tedious noise. To Eamon, it was a sonar. Through the repetition, he heard the heavy oak doors of the salon open. Heavy footsteps. The rustle of stiff military fatigues. "The shipment is delayed at Latakia," a voice grumbled. It was deep, gravelly, General Al-Hassan. "The Soviets are being difficult about the guidance chips," another voice replied. Lighter, faster, accented. A Russian translator or an educated Syrian aide? Eamon kept playing the same A440 note, adjusting it microtonally. He didn't freeze. He didn't turn his head. He became part of the machinery of the room. They claim the end-user agreement wasn't signed by the president, the general said. Tell them if the SA-6 batteries aren't operational by November, I will speak to Moscow directly. SA-6 batteries. The code word flashed in Ayman's mind. Surface-to-air missiles, the gainful system. This was critical intelligence. Israel needed to know where and when these mobile air defense systems were being deployed. For 2 hours, the men discussed logistics, supply lines, and the frustrations of dealing with their Soviet patrons. They drank tea, the clinking of the cups giving Amman their exact location in the room. They unfurled maps, the distinct crinkle of parchment paper. "Look here," the general said. "Sector 4, the Golan approach." Ayman couldn't see the map, but he could hear the finger tapping on the paper. Tap, tap, tap. He memorized the rhythm of the conversation, the pauses, the tone. When he finished tuning, the general approached him. "You take a long time, Ustad Amman. Perfection requires patience, Excellency," Amman said, bowing slightly, staring at the general's chest. "The humidity in Damascus has been high. The wood swells. It fights the string." The general laughed, a booming sound. "Everything in this country fights. You play well?" "I try, Excellency." "Play something. My wife likes Chopin." Ayman sat at the bench. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a rhythm he prayed the general couldn't hear. He played a nocturne, pouring all his tension into the fluid, melancholic runs. That night, back in his small apartment in the Christian quarter, Ayman sat at his own upright piano. He hit record on a cassette player. He played a jarring, discordant series of chords, the identifier for high priority. Then he wove the melody of the report. Low bass notes for missiles, a sharp staccato rhythm for Soviet delay, a specific progression in D minor for Golan sector. The cassette was placed in a hollowed-out book of poetry, which he left at a specific second-hand bookstall the next morning. The trade was done. The blind man had seen the future of the front lines. As the months passed, Ayman's integration into the elite social circuit of Damascus deepened. He was no longer just a technician. He was a mascot for the regime's cultural pretensions. He was invited to play background music at cocktail parties, diplomatic receptions, and private dinners. This was the golden cage phase of the operation. He was surrounded by luxury and power, yet he was constantly on the edge of the abyss. At these parties, the alcohol flowed freely. Whiskey and arak loosened tongues that should have remained sealed. Ayman sat at the piano, usually in a corner, providing a soundtrack of jazz and light classical music. He wore dark glasses that reflected the chandeliers, his face a mask of concentration. He learned the gossip of the wives, which often revealed more than the files of the husbands. He learned which general was sleeping with which secretary, creating opportunities for blackmail. He learned which minister was gambling away state funds, indicating corruption and weakness. But the most valuable intelligence came from the Soviet advisors. There were hundreds of them in Syria at the time, military specialists, engineers, and intelligence officers from the KGB and GRU. They tended to congregate at these parties, isolating themselves in cliques, speaking Russian. They assumed no one in the room understood them. Why would a Syrian piano player know Russian? But Ayman had a gift for languages, and part of his training in France had involved an intensive crash course in military Russian. He couldn't speak it fluently, but he could understand the keywords, the numbers, the technical jargon. One evening, at the residence of the Minister of Interior, Amman picked up a conversation between two Soviet attachés standing near the piano. "The T-72 upgrade packages," one whispered. "The reactive armor plates. They are arriving next week. Are the Syrians ready for them?" "No, they will strip the gears within a month, but the contract is signed." Ayman transitioned smoothly from Blue Moon into a slightly more aggressive improvisation, masking the sudden spike in his adrenaline. Reactive armor. This was a game-changer for tank warfare. If Israeli tank crews fired standard rounds at these new T-72s, they would bounce off. They needed to know. He had to transmit this fast. But the bookstall drop was too slow for this kind of tactical intel. He needed a signal. The next day, Ayman walked to a public park near the University of Damascus. He sat on a bench feeding pigeons. A man sat on the other end of the bench reading a newspaper. They did not look at each other. They did not speak. Eamon began to hum a tune, tapping his cane against his shoe. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap. It was a crude method, dangerous but necessary. The man on the bench folded his newspaper, stood up, and walked away. The message was received. Within 48 hours, technical specs on reactive armor penetration were being briefed to Israeli Armored Corps commanders. Espionage is a game of paranoia, and eventually, even the perfect cover attracts scrutiny. It wasn't a slip-up by Eamon that triggered it, but the sheer statistical improbability of the leaks. Colonel Kamil of the Mukhabarat's counterintelligence division was a hunter. He noticed a pattern. Intelligence regarding high-level meetings was leaking to the Israelis with alarming speed. The leaks were not coming from documents. They were coming from verbal discussions held in secure locations. Kamil ordered a sweep of all villas and ministries. They tore apart walls looking for microphones. They checked telephone lines. They found nothing. "It is not a device," Kamil told his staff. "It is a person, someone who is present." He began to cross-reference the guest lists of the meetings where information had leaked. Generals, wives, waiters, cleaners, and the musician, Amon Safir, the blind man. It seemed ridiculous. A blind piano tuner? But Kamil was a man who believed that the only impossibility was trust. He decided to test the musician. Amon was summoned to the colonel's office in the basement of the intelligence headquarters. The air down there was different, stale, cold, smelling of bleach and fear. Eamon felt the change in acoustics as he was led down concrete corridors. The echo was flat, oppressive. "Sit," Kamil commanded. Eamon found the chair with his cane and sat. "How can I help the colonel? Is there an instrument here that needs attention?" "The instrument of the state is out of tune, Amon," Kamil said, circling him. "I am looking for the discord." Kamil pulled a pistol from his holster. He didn't cock it, but the sound of the metal sliding against leather was distinct. Eamon heard it. He wanted to flinch. His instincts screamed at him to duck, but he forced his body to remain loose. He tapped his fingers on his knee as if playing a silent trill. "I am told you have excellent hearing," Kamil said softly, leaning close to Eamon's ear. "It is my compensation, sir. God takes one thing, he sharpens another. What do you hear now?" Kamil quietly, very quietly, unscrewed the silencer from a drawer and threaded it onto the barrel. The microscopic grinding of metal on metal. "I hear the ventilation system. It has a rattle. A loose bearing, perhaps," Eamon said calmly. Kamil raised the gun and pointed it at Eamon's temple. He held it there for a long minute. Eamon could feel the heat of the man standing next to him, could hear the slow, rhythmic breathing of a predator. Then, without warning, Kamil slammed a heavy book onto the desk right next to Amon's head. Bang! Eamon jumped. It was a natural reflex. Anyone would jump. But he didn't look at the noise. He covered his ears and cowered, turning his head erratically, like a blind man bewildered by chaos. "Plays!" Eamon cried out. "My ears! It is too loud!" Kamil watched him closely. If Amon had looked directly at the book or the gun, he would be dead. But Amon's eyes had rolled vaguely upward, his reaction purely auditory. Kamil holstered the gun. "Forgive me. I dropped a file. You are jumpy, musician." "My ears are my life, Colonel. Loud noises. They are painful." "Go," Kamil said, dismissive. "Tune the piano in the officer's mess on your way out. It sounds like a dying cat." Eamon walked out of the headquarters, tapping his cane. His shirt was soaked in cold sweat. He knew he had passed the test, but he also knew the clock was ticking. They were looking at him. The pressure mounted in 1981. Tensions between Israel and Syria were reaching a boiling point over the presence of Syrian surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Israel wanted to launch an operation to destroy them, but the air defense network was dense and integrated. Mossad needed the exact frequencies of the radar tracking systems. If they could jam those frequencies, the Israeli Air Force could wipe out the SAM sites with minimal losses. The information was located in a safe in the office of the Air Force Chief of Staff. Eamon couldn't pick a safe, but he knew the Chief of Staff was a man of habit who held weekly briefings in his office every Tuesday evening. Eamon was hired to tune the piano in the anteroom of the Chief's office. It was a bold, almost reckless move by his handlers. They needed him to be there during the briefing. He arrived at 4 Gauss p.m. The briefing was at 5 Gauss p.m. He stretched out the work. He dismantled the action of the piano, spreading parts across the floor so he couldn't be easily moved. At 5:15 p.m., the door to the inner office was left slightly ajar to allow airflow in the stifling heat. Eamon worked in silence, placing felt mutes between the strings to ensure he made no sound. He tuned his hearing to the maximum. He strained every nerve ending. "The spoon rest radar is operating on..." A voice drifted out. Then numbers, frequencies, modulation rates. Eamon memorized them. 3.2 gigahertz. Pulse repetition 400. Then, disaster. A young lieutenant stepped out of the office to get coffee. He saw Eamon sitting there, head cocked toward the door. "What are you doing?" the lieutenant snapped. Eamon didn't freeze. He immediately struck a loud, dissonant chord on the piano. Clang. "Ah!" Eamon shouted. "Finally, the pin is loose. I apologize, sir. Did I disturb you? This instrument is a stubborn mule." The lieutenant looked at the blind man, surrounded by tools, sweating, looking frustrated. The suspicion evaporated. "Keep it down. The general is in a meeting." "I will use the soft pedal, sir. My apologies." The door closed, but Amon had the numbers. That night, the transmission was different. It wasn't a cassette. It was a phone call to a number in Europe. Eamon played a series of rapid, high-pitched notes on a flute, a new instrument he had claimed to be learning. The sequence was a direct digital encryption of the radar frequencies. Weeks later, Operation Mole Cricket 19 was launched. The Israeli Air Force, armed with the precise jamming frequencies, blinded the Syrian radar network. In a matter of hours, the entire Syrian air defense system in the Bekaa Valley was destroyed. 82 Soviet-made MiGs were shot down. Israel lost 0 aircraft. In Damascus, there was shock. How did they know? The breach was catastrophic. The success of the operation was Amon's greatest triumph, but it also signaled the end of his safety. The Mukhabarat knew the leak had been precise. They began to purge everyone who had been near the information. Amon noticed the change in the atmosphere. The invitations to parties stopped. His phone line had a new, faint click when he picked it up, a clumsy tap. When he walked down the street, the echo of footsteps behind him was constant. He contacted Henri via an emergency signal, a chalk mark on a specific mailbox. The reply was swift: exfiltrate immediately, cover blown. But leaving wasn't simple. Eamon was a well-known figure. He couldn't just hop on a plane. The borders were watched. He needed a vanishing act. The Mossad devised a plan that leveraged his fame. Eamon would announce a charity concert at the grandest hall in Damascus, a performance for the Soldiers' Relief Fund. It was a move designed to appease the regime and lower their guard. Who would run away right before their biggest concert? The preparations were intense. Eamon practiced day and night. The Mukhabarat relaxed slightly, believing that a man preparing for a gala was not a flight risk. They placed a detail outside his apartment, but they didn't watch him inside. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was packed. Generals, ministers, and even Colonel Kamil were in the audience. Amon walked onto the stage, guided by the stage manager. The applause was thunderous. He sat at the piano. He couldn't see the audience, but he could feel their presence, a heavy, suffocating weight. He knew this was the last time he would ever play in the city of his birth. He played beautifully, Rachmaninoff, Mozart, and finally an original composition, a haunting, complex piece full of dissonance and resolve. It was his goodbye note to Damascus. During the intermission, Amon was escorted to his dressing room. The guard stood outside the door. Inside, a wardrobe assistant was waiting. It was a Caesarea agent. "We have 5 minutes," the agent whispered. They didn't go out the back door. That was watched. Instead, they went down. The dressing room had a trap door leading to the old ventilation shafts of the theater, a detail Eamon had discovered years ago by the sound of hollow wood under his feet. They lowered themselves into the darkness. Eamon, who lived in the dark, took the lead. He navigated the maze of tunnels by the feel of the airflow and the sound of the city above. The agent followed, stumbling where Eamon moved with grace. Above them, the intermission ended. The audience waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The stage manager knocked on the dressing room door. No answer. Panic set in. They broke down the door. The room was empty. Colonel Kamil sprinted to the stage. shouting orders to seal the building, seal the city. But the blind musician had slipped into the earth. The escape from Damascus was not a high-speed chase, but a slow, terrifying crawl. Eamon and the agent surfaced in the basement of a safe house in the intricate alleyways of the old city. There, Eamon was transformed. They shaved his head. They dyed his skin darker. They took away his cane and his dark glasses. "You must keep your eyes open," the agent told him. "You must look like you can see. Can you do that?" It was the hardest performance of his life. Eamon had to focus his unseeing eyes, to turn his head as if tracking movement, to walk without the tapping cane that had been his radar for a decade. He had to rely entirely on the agent's arm, disguised as an elderly uncle being helped by a nephew. They moved south toward the Jordanian border. They rode in the back of a vegetable truck buried under sacks of onions. The smell was overpowering, blinding Eamon's nose, robbing him of one of his senses. He felt trapped, encased in darkness and stench. At the border crossing, the tension was physical. Eamon could hear the guards shouting, the racking of rifle bolts. He heard the heavy boots approaching the truck. "Papers!" a guard shouted. The agent handed over the forged documents. "My uncle is sick. We are going to the shrine in Daraa," the guard grunted. He poked the onion sacks with a bayonet. The metal sliced through the burlap inches from Eamon's face. He felt the wind of the blade. He wanted to scream. He held his breath until his lungs burned. "Go," the guard said. The engine roared to life. As they crossed the buffer zone, the road surface changed from the rough asphalt of Syria to the smoother pave of Jordan. Eamon heard the change in the tire hum. It was the sound of freedom. Amon Safir never played the piano publicly again. He was resettled in a quiet town near Tel Aviv under a new name. The Mossad provided him with a small house and a pension. He was a hero, but a secret one. His file was sealed. The intelligence he had provided, on the missiles, the tanks, the radar, had saved countless lives and shifted the strategic balance of the Middle East. But the transition was hard. He missed the sounds of Damascus, the specific call to prayer from the Umayyad Mosque, the chatter of the souk, the accent of his people. He was safe, but he was in exile. The Mossad handlers visited him occasionally. Henry came once, years later. "You did the impossible, Amon," Henry said. "You saw what we could not." "I heard," Amon corrected gently. "I only heard." He spent his days tuning pianos for the local conservatory. He was known as the quiet man who could make even the oldest, most broken instrument sing with perfect clarity. One afternoon, a young student asked him, "How do you know when it's perfect?" Eamon paused, his hand resting on the tuning pins. He thought of the general's villa, the sound of the gun slide, the roar of the onion truck, the silence of the tunnels. "It is never perfect," Eamon said. "There is always tension. The string must be tight enough to sing, but not so tight that it snaps. That is the balance. That is life." Years later, military historians would puzzle over the sudden and inexplicable accuracy of Israeli intelligence during the early 1980s. They would write books about satellite technology and signal interception. They would speculate about high-ranking defectors. None of them suspected the truth. They didn't look at the footnotes of the social columns in old Damascus newspapers. They didn't notice the blind musician in the background of the photographs of General al-Hassan's parties. Amon remained a ghost. In the intelligence community, his story became a legend, whispered to new recruits at the Mossad Academy. The story of the tuner. It was a lesson in the cardinal rule of espionage. Your greatest weakness can be your greatest weapon. The operation also changed how the Mossad viewed disability. It opened the door for analysts and operatives who didn't fit the mold of the rugged commando. It proved that the mind is the ultimate spy tool, and that perception is subjective. Back in Syria, Colonel Camille eventually fell from grace, blamed for the leaks he couldn't plug. He spent his retirement obsessed with the memory of the blind man. He realized, too late, that the man had been playing them all like a grand piano, striking every key with precise, devastating intent. Amon Safir passed away in 2005. At his funeral, there were only a few people. His neighbors, a few students, and 3 men in dark suits who stood in the back. When the coffin was lowered, one of the men in suits stepped forward and placed a small object on the grave. It wasn't a flower. It was a tuning fork. He struck it against the tombstone. A pure, clear note rang out, vibrating in the quiet air of the cemetery. A440, the standard pitch, the anchor of all music. The note faded into silence, just as Amen had faded into the shadows of history. But the resonance remained. The blind musician of Damascus had played his part. He had turned the noise of war into the sheet music of victory. And in the end, he had found his own peace, not in the applause of a concert hall, but in the quiet satisfaction of a duty fulfilled in the dark. Outro. The story of Amen Safir reminds us that in the world of intelligence, nothing is what it appears to be. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most unique operations in espionage history, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find more truth seekers like you. Don't forget to subscribe and check out our other videos on the screen now. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers in the noise.